Alrighty. Hey, welcome to another episode of Savor Food and Body. Today, my guest is Jessie Holden. She's a dietitian and registered dietitian since 2013 with an emphasis on culinary nutrition through the lens of intuitive eating. She specializes in helping beginners learn how to cook for wellness in an approachable and fun way. She's the owner of the Kitchen Innovation, where she welcomes everyone of all skills to cook, learn, and listen with her. She hosts an online community specifically geared towards helping beginner cooks and a podcast that solves common cooking dilemmas, provides kitchen inspiration, and hosts guests I'm going to start this over again.
Okay, because you also said innovation and it's called invitation.
Invitation. Oh, you're right.
Yeah,
okay, here.
that's okay.
Let me make this a little bigger for my over 40 eyes.
All good. No worries.
No, I'm glad you said something about that. Okay, let's see. Did I accidentally cut this off? Unfortunately. Okay, invitation. Okay, there we go. All right. Pause so we can cut it out. Welcome to another episode of Savor Food and Body. Today I'm talking to fellow registered dietitian Jessie Holden. She's been a dietitian since 2013 with an emphasis on culinary nutrition through the lens of intuitive eating. She specializes in helping beginners learn how to cook for wellness in an approachable and fun way. She's the owner of the Kitchen Invitation, where she welcomes everyone of every skill level to learn to cook and listen with her. She hosts an online community specifically geared towards helping beginner cooks and a podcast that solves common cooking dilemmas, provides kitchen inspiration, and hosts guests to zero in. I'm going to clip that too, because it's just not spelled right, and encourages guests to zero in on specific nutrition questions and needs in the kitchen. So Jessie, it's so wonderful to meet you and have you here on the podcast today. And I got to say, after working with my clients all these years, having someone help with that how-to in the kitchen, especially when we're busy, we have a lot going on in our lives, and maybe a person didn't really get introduced to cooking. You and I are probably both of a generation, as most of our listeners are, where kind of grown up in a household where both parents worked and kitchen skills just really weren't taught. It was more about warm it up, get it on the table, and move on. And so now that we're working with people, and oftentimes women are the ones providing the food, not always, but oftentimes that is part of still one of their cultural roles. And so it can kind of be like, what do? I got to feed this family. Like, how do I do that? So I'm glad we're here to talk about this today.
I'm so glad we're here too. Thank you so much for having me on today.
So let's just start by one of the things that you talk about on your website, or one of the phrases on your website, is nutrition is meant to be livable, doable, and fun. So let's grab your apron and dive in. Like, what do you mean by that? And how does that show up in your work with people?
Yeah, so I'm a big fan of coming up with like 3 things that define what it is that I do, whether you call them pillars or goals or whatever it is, mechanisms, anything. So those, I kind of thought of like, what are the key things I like to work on with people? What does it need to be? And like, what is important as well? So livable to me means sustainable. Like, I think a lot of times you see people encouraging changes that are super drastic, super restrictive, and just not helpful, not sustainable. And if I ask people like, well, is that livable? Like, is that something you can live with for the rest of their life? They're like, well, no, I could do it for 30 days though. It's like, let's try something different. Let's try something that's more livable. Because that is such an important factor here. Things have to work within your life, not the other way around. You don't want it to not work with your life. And then doable means like when we're setting like a new goal, or we're working on behavior changes, whether that's in or out of the kitchen, you want to make sure that we are taking time and like really focusing on whatever it has to be like really small. So it's got to be very, very doable. If I told someone like, okay, I'm not like a running coach, but if I said, go run 3 miles, that may be completely not doable to somebody. And they're going to be like, oh, that's not helpful at all because that's not doable for me. So whatever steps we take to making the behavior change livable, those doable, actionable steps have to be small, incremental, and just exciting, which brings me to the last one, which is fun. And so I just think it's really, really important to me to keep food fun, to keep the kitchen a fun space, because we eat hopefully at least 3 times a day. Most of us eat 3 times a day, or some people are not there. But say we're cooking and eating 3 times a day, that's 365 days a year. That's like a little over 1,000. It's just under 1,100 meals a day, not including snacks, that we have a lot of opportunities to have fun with. So I just think encouraging people to have fun in the kitchen, to grab the apron, like get in the kitchen, let's learn. I just think it's got to be fun. Otherwise, I think without the fun, I don't think it's doable, and then I don't think it's livable. So you kind of need all three to go hand in hand. And honestly, I think the kitchen is the greatest classroom to learn in. It's hands-on. You can see what we're doing, and if I had it my way, I would do all of my one-on-ones with people in a kitchen and like be teaching chopping and cooking skills while doing like the nutrition counseling that I do.
That would be amazing. I could just,
I
yeah,
know it.
see that whole setup. Yeah, forget I mean, we were probably trained in a setting where for our clinical rotations, we maybe did have a white jacket on, and, that was very hospital sterile, which there's a good reason for hospital sterile,
Right.
atmosphere. But when we're talking about food and our relationships with food, like, yeah, that can just freak people out. And then, but even sometimes the whole like counseling setting, and I'm coming to talk about my food problems, like that can also be intimidating for folks too. And so to that idea of just exploring that relationship with food in our bodies in a hopefully warm, comforting environment that is also about making food together is just would be is an awesome idea. And you think you're doing a little bit of that just by having your online platform in your community, which is great to do that. I think I see this a lot with my clients, and then I've also been a culinary education coordinator for another organization before. And so I wasn't necessarily doing the teaching, but I was there hosting the classes. And so as the instructor would start to teach, then I kind of got to stand back and just kind of watch the dynamics in the room. And there's something really profound about people engaging with the food, and maybe it's even a food that they haven't allowed themselves to eat, which we're going to talk about in a second.
Yeah.
But engaging in a fun way where everybody else around them is also engaging with that food. And in our setup, we would cook together and then we all ate together too. And people knew, of course, the menu ahead of time, so they could decide if that was for them or not. But there was just this idea of it brought everybody to the same playing field in terms of their opinions about food. Like they chose to come to this class, and they were open to experiencing that experience. However, being the counselor that I am, I could also see on the faces around the room, like that was pushing some people to get out of their comfort zone with that food, either from whatever they learned through diet culture about that food, or just the cooking techniques in themselves, like
Exactly.
making handmade pasta, or making, but the one that really blew my mind away, because I grew up with homemade salad dressing, but this profound look on this participant's face when we made dressing from scratch. They're like, I didn't realize that could be that easy. And so whether it's the food itself or the recipe or the technique, it's just really amazing to watch people kind of connect with food in that way. That is separate from everything they maybe hear from their medical providers or online or whatever about food. There can be so much finger wagging when it comes to food instead of the fun of food.
Yeah, right. And that's why I think I emphasize that word fun, because like you said a second ago, I know we're going to get into it, but like diet culture and our society in general tends to suck the fun out of food. Like it just takes it right out. And like you said, I think that's why I love cooking so much, is that like I love helping people get diet culture out, but I also like just helping people with the other challenge of learning to cook, because a lot of people don't have that knowledge. That nobody's born a cook. You are taught or self-taught in some kind of way. And so I love both challenges of exploring how to like get rid of the diet culture mentality around our food and cooking, and also how do we cook? I mean, that's a big part of
Absolutely.
it.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I love what you said at the beginning too, is that it can be helpful to have some sort of framework or pillars
Mhm.
to kind of guide where you're starting with people and how you're helping people. And so if we were to look at like a guide post or a step one and thinking about it, like how do we just keep diet culture out of the kitchen? Like
Mhm.
bar, starting point one. When I first read that again on your website, I thought, okay, we have to start with ingredients before
Mhm.
you're going to cook something, or you're going to have to choose a recipe. And so
Mhm.
there's so many potential diet culture thoughts that can come up with in the type of recipe someone might want to cook,
Yep.
or the ingredients that are involved. So how do you approach that with people, with
Yeah,
keeping the
one
diet culture out?
Yeah, keeping that diet culture out of the kitchen it's very important to me. It's not always like, I like to tell people it's not a perfect thing. You can't stop a thought if a thought comes up, even if we do what I'm about to say, which is a screening tool I like to do with people. Like diet thoughts might still pop up, and there's a different like tool for those kinds of thoughts that come up. But one of the first things I like to do is just screen for where diet culture is currently kind of festering in the kitchen. Is it mainly within your thoughts about food? Is it mainly the old cookbooks you have that are from different diets you've done? Do you still have some maybe quote unquote diet food from a diet you've done? You had to purchase like the meal replacements or something for it. Are those lingering in the back of the cupboard or the drawers? Do you have like a food scale? Now I know some people use a food scale for baking and like preciseness, which can be great. I'm not a great baker, so I don't use one. But everyone's a little different. So I like to run through just some of those really common things that may be influencing our thoughts to get sucked back into that diet mentality a little bit. And if we can screen for them and maybe take them out or get rid of them, donate them, whatever it means, that's like a really, really good first step. Like you said, first, when we're going to cook, you're gonna have to back up and either find a recipe or even back up further and be like, wait, do I have a knife? Do I have a cutting board? Like you got to go through the whole gambit. So I really love screening for like physical things, like I said, like equipment or books or recipes, things that are kind of in our kitchen that we may not be aware of that need to go. But I really love to also take that next step and also screen for like what kind of language we're using in the kitchen. Are you shoulding on yourself a lot, saying like, I shouldn't cook this, I should cook that, I should eat that, this is good, this is bad? I like to try to explore how often we're saying that in the kitchen and how can we say something different. Those are just some of the very first things to screen for.
Yeah, no, that's so true. And you brought up a really good point just with the tools in general,
Mhm.
and there might be tools that are left over from someone's dieting past, but then there also might be tools that they don't have. Like you said, having
Mhm.
a good knife that hasn't been
Yep.
used to cut everything else in the kitchen but
Right.
food.
Right.
And just some basic like how to cut an onion and how to cut vegetables. The number of times that I've heard from clients of like, yeah, I'd love to eat more salads, but it just feels like it's a lot of work. It feels like
Yep.
it's a lot of work to eat vegetables. That comes up a lot.
Yeah.
And it doesn't have to be if someone has some really basic knife handling skills, really, just and real
Exactly.
basic, not fancy, but just removing that barrier. That doesn't have to be so scary to use a knife
Mm.
and to cut things up, or to cut things up ahead of time to use later on in the week or anything like that. So
Yeah.
that's
Mhm.
awesome. I'm glad that you go through that part of it. And so, when thinking about ingredients, and I was just having this conversation with a client last night too, and we were talking about, protein sources that she might have around the house. And I mentioned, dairy can be a good protein source, especially if it's like Greek yogurt or Icelandic yogurt, because the concentration of protein is higher in those
Yeah.
thicker yogurt. She's like,
Mhm.
yeah, I try to eat Greek yogurt. I don't really like it, but I try to eat it. And I said, well, why are you eating it if you don't like it? Well, I heard it's good for us. So, and I was like, oh, hold the phone. And how often does that happen with
Yeah.
how we cook foods too? Like, oh, I'd really like to use some butter, but I heard that butter is really bad for me and it's gonna,
Exactly.
jack up my cholesterol, and I should use only olive oil. Or, and I worked under this context for a while when I worked for Whole Foods Market for the first 6 years of my career, and I was helping them with a part of their healthy eating program, and they were
Uh-huh.
advocating for no added oils. So,
Oh
which I don't agree with at all, for lots of reasons
no.
aside from the
Yeah.
culinary reasons. But so, if people have been exposed to those diet culture thoughts and recommendations, then just boosting their confidence to like, yeah, it's okay to cook with some of these ingredients. And there's probably even a
Mhm.
food science reason
Yes.
that we cook with certain ingredients in order to get the food to turn out in a
Yep.
satisfying way.
You mentioned olive oil, and I love all the oils too. I'm not. I think that's just crazy that somebody would be like, let's get rid of all the oils. But I also didn't like how much of a like everybody loves olive oil and raves about it, right? All the oh my goodness, the quality fats in there, things like that. Yes, olive oil has quality fats. Butter absolutely can be a part of our life too. And I don't think what people realize is when they're telling someone like you should only use olive oil, well, olive oil smoke point is a lot lower. So a lot of my clients will come and they're like, well, they say olive oil is the best. It's good for me. I should use it. But my vegetables keep burning in the oven because your oven's too hot for your olive oil. So it's like, yeah, it's funny when you think of all those things that people are hearing day in, day out. And then when you pull it all back to where is it getting applied in their lives, a lot of times it's in the kitchen, whether they're making something and feeling guilty and bad because that is what they're going to make and what they're going to eat, but they think it's bad for them. Even if it's just a grilled cheese, something like that with a little butter on it to grill it up even better. Or they're forcing themselves, like you said too, to eat something that they've heard is good for them, but they're not really enjoying it and getting that satisfaction maybe out of their food and meals. So yeah, that's why I like to screen for that language and see where that's popping up in their cooking.
Yeah, and that word that you just mentioned, satisfaction, is so important with having enjoyment with our food and creating a healthy relationship with food. But when you're applying it in the kitchen too, I think it's really interesting to teach satisfaction from kind of that food science perspective. Like you said, like there's a reason we put butter on a grilled cheese sandwich to toast it and make it brown. Like that is part of a scientific reaction that's happening. Another also culinary dietitian has been on the podcast before, and we were talking about baking and baking with different sugars. And
Mm-hmm.
she was really dispelling the myths around like sugar is sugar. Like we don't have to put health halos over some of them and really
Mm-hmm.
demonize others. Like we just need to
Right.
understand that there's different chemical, like crystalline structures that are going to line up in those different types of sugars, and they're going to create a different end product. So if you're trying to go for satisfaction and someone is practicing to bring more satisfaction into their relationship with food, it's not going to work to use honey in your cookie and expect to get a nice flat crispy cookie. It's just honey just
Exactly.
doesn't work that way. And it's not because the person did it wrong. I think that's another
Yep.
important piece that I often saw in the cooking classes is people would be so afraid that I did it wrong. I ruined the recipe because it didn't turn out a certain way. And to your point with the olive oil, well, did the recipe not turn out the way that they thought that it should because there wasn't the right ingredient for
Mm-hmm.
the method of the recipe? So the honey for the
Exactly.
cookie and you're hoping to get a crispy cookie, or
Right.
the olive oil on the roasted veggies and you wonder why your veggies are brown and kind of limp.
Yeah.
And so there's, I mean, I guess to our point, to like sum this up for people, is that one, just go and play and have fun. And
Absolutely.
two, pause and get curious about if things don't turn out the way that you were hoping them to turn out in a satisfying way. could that be because of some diet culture mentality that has come into the kitchen with you? And so maybe you tried to swap out some ingredients or cut back on some ingredients, and then that's going to affect the method of the recipe and how the food is going to turn out. So it's not your fault. It's diet culture's fault. Yet again, it's diet culture's fault.
100%. And I think you said it, just have fun and explore, make a mess in the kitchen. That's what kitchens are for. I know a lot of people like to have a clean kitchen at the end of the day, which I am one of those too. But from morning until night, it's a mess because I'm cooking, I'm cutting, I'm chopping, I'm moving, I'm swiping, I'm all of the things. So just make a mess in the kitchen and have fun with it.
Yeah, I think this relates really well down into our next point too, is the question, like, is it too late to learn how to cook? I think a lot of the women that I work with, there's a fair amount of shame around not being able to cook, like maybe their mom's cooked or their grandmother's cooked. And some of them have made peace with it, going, no, I do the career thing, I don't do the domestic thing, and that's cool. But there's still like this little piece, like, I feel like I should know how to do the basics, but I don't know how to do the basics. And so is it too late for someone to figure out how to do that or learn how to improve their cooking skills while they're juggling the rest of midlife?
It is never too late to learn to cook. So I've been teaching cooking classes since 2013, whether I was teaching little kids or somebody in their 80s or 90s. They are learning new things. I think actually you said this specific example earlier. The number of times I would teach somebody of all kinds of ages how to cut an onion, because I mean, onions are such a staple in food. Onions, garlic, we would always do some like really basic things with those two ingredients since they were really cheap and affordable. So they're a little bit more accessible. And to teach someone how to cut it and saute it, it's like, oh my gosh, your cooking just took it up 10 levels just knowing those two little things. So yeah, no, it is never too late to learn how to cook. I think it's just important to have an open mindset about it and watch out for those shoulds. Like you said, I hear that phrase a lot. I feel like I should know how to cook. I'm like, okay, well, do you want to? Because if you don't want to, that's okay. Like there's a lot of like uncooking methods too of eating. Like not everything has to be done from scratch, and you can use lots of different shortcuts and stuff. And so just learning, like first, you have to assess kind of where are your cooking skills at, like what do you feel like you're good at, what do you feel like you would have some skills that you could improve on, maybe setting some goals. What do you want out of cooking? Are you looking for one homemade meal a week? Are you looking for just better, faster at chopping produce, things like that? Are you looking for more flavor? So there's fun ways to set goals in the kitchen that are not body related, which I love. And then figuring out what kind of simple cooking skills you need to work on, like sauteing or roasting, equipment cooking, like using an immersion blender or food processor, whatever you've got that's collecting dust. Maybe we want to pull it out, or maybe we need to donate it so it just reduces the clutter. But yeah, to answer your question simply, it is never too late to learn or get better at cooking.
And I love what you said there too, is that it doesn't even have to be cooking per se as a way of feeding yourself. And I've had many conversations about this recently too, especially, I don't know if you guys have Trader Joe's back there, but places like Trader Joe's or Costco or something, like they've really started to up their game in terms of their offerings in the frozen section or the pre-cut vegetables, the salads, the dressings, whatever. And they're fairly, decent. And by decent, I mean like satisfying type ingredients. It's not a bunch of filler type ingredients, which can kind of leave people like, in terms of the satisfaction factor. But even just helping someone decide, well, what combinations do I put together? How do I make a burrito bowl or something like that with not cooking anything? It's just you open this package and this can and this jar of sauce, and there you go. You have a meal.
Exactly. It can be so simple. And I think sometimes that's what I love to teach people the most are those uncooking methods, because again, diet culture not only robs us of joy in the kitchen, but it robs us of variety and like options. It can really reduce and limit people's options in the kitchens. We think that we can't have canned food or frozen or boxed or packaged, and it's like, for a sustainable, livable, doable, and fun kitchen, in my opinion, and I think in yours as well, like packaged and pre-made and shortcuts and things like that, they serve such a wonderful purpose in the kitchen to help you eat all kinds of nourishing foods in an easy and approachable way, whether you have to cook them or not.
Absolutely. And helping yourself get some variety. You know, if a barrier to getting more variety is thinking that you have to cook everything from scratch, then that's a thought that you need to challenge. And I've definitely had that conversation before too. And the other conversation that often comes up is the prepping, the meal prepping, the grocery list writing, and around intuitive eating too. So, I know I'm kind of throwing in a bonus question here too, but I'm wondering if we can talk through that. Like, how do you work with people with meal planning and meal prepping while still honoring this idea of intuitive eating, and that it's not going to, just because you have a meal plan or a meal prep plan and a grocery list doesn't mean that you're hard and fast tied to that's what you have to eat this week. So how do you teach people along those lines?
Yeah, so I think I can answer that question in one fell swoop. I think I can. So when I think about it, first with like meal planning and prep, I like to find somebody's meal prep and plan personality. And that's as a part of intuitive eating and kind of just as a separate thing. I think we all have to find our own little like prep and planning personality. But the one personality trait that I recommend with those, which does tie back into intuitive eating, is to have a very open and flexible mindset. So if you can keep a flexible attitude towards your kitchen and your meal plan, you are so much more likely to, one, get dinner on the table faster, because all of a sudden, if you're like, I got home and I didn't take the meat out of the freezer and now we're not going to eat for another hour and a half, and it's like, ooh, if you've got the knowledge of cooking and some basic cooking skills, and you've got a flexible mindset, and you've even got like that bonus like skill set of like, well, I could reapply some of this produce here and here, or freeze some of it here, you've all of a sudden like turned a very stressful situation, because a lot of people get home and they're like, what am I having? Or I didn't take this out of the freezer, or I don't know what to do. And then they feel like a failure, which is like, no, don't go that route. You're not a failure. You can't fail at it. You can't. You just have to pivot. That's one of my favorite quotes from Friends. I've never even watched all of Friends, but is when like the couch is going up the
couch.
Like, yes, and they're like, pivot, pivot.
That's a classic meme that I've seen pop up on Instagram in varying scenarios.
Yeah, whether it's like
perfect
tube feeding pivot or brand, or like pivoting your brain mindset. Like, I just love that word pivot, but I can't not think of the couch whenever I say that word. So hopefully someone else is listening and they like Friends. But the easier you can pivot, the easier it is to get dinner on the table and enjoy a flexible mindset instead of a stressed out one about your plan. And I usually tell people too, make a plan. Absolutely. I think learning to make a plan and learning your prepping personality to make that plan work is great. Plans can like diverge, they can grow, they can ebb, and they can flow. And the better we adopt that, like just the easier it's going to become. And I think that's kind of goes hand in hand with intuitive eating. If we have a plan to do the intuitive eating workbook and we think it's going to go from A to Z absolutely perfect, it's like, no, it's not probably how that's going to work out.
Yeah, that's so true. And again, even with intuitive eating, yes, there's 10 principles of intuitive eating. And I remember Evelyn Tribole saying this in the supervision that I did with her, saying, when you write a book, you have to write it in this like sequential thing. That's editors like that. But that doesn't mean that you have to follow in a linear fashion the principles of intuitive eating, rejecting the diet culture, that's a must first, because that's the foundation.
Yes.
But then how everything else kind of flows together, that can be very specific. And I love that, what did you say, the personality, the planning person, the prep and planning personality.
Yep.
In a way, that's kind of how intuitive eating flows too. Like, we're going to take someone's personality and their capacity to practicing new skills into context when we're talking about the different principles of intuitive eating. And you're right, that's a really nice parallel with how do you do meal planning and meal prepping too, and to not be afraid of doing it wrong, because you can't do it wrong. I mean, I guess maybe doing it wrong is you didn't eat at all.
Right.
And you went to bed starving, and your whole family went to bed starving, which again, there's a food security piece to that too, or food insecurity piece to that too, that is privilege into just being able to throw something together as well. But one of the other things too, I'm wondering if you talk about this with your clients, is that in part of that plan for some takeout, plan for meal pickups. And so that it makes it, again, it kind of builds in that flexibility, and it keeps the person from thinking, I have to cook every single night.
Right. Yep. I think sometimes when people say, I want to get better at cooking, I want to learn how to cook, they do come in with the assumption of like, I have to cook every single night. And you can, if that's your goal, absolutely. That's a doable goal for a lot of people. Not for a lot of people, that's a doable goal that can be specific to somebody. But that's why I like to find somebody's like planning and prep personality, like, and assess, where are your cooking skills right now? What are you doing? What are you eating like right now? And if your goal is to, reduce eating out and you want to cook at home once or twice, great. We can plan on how to do that still in a flexible way. I always recommend an encore night, which is leftover night. It's just a little more fun spin on the word.
I love that.
Encore.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Yeah. Like when at a concert, they'll come on for their encore round. It might be a song that but they might put like a new twist on it. So you can bring out a meal you've already cooked that you're going to reheat, but maybe you're putting a little twist on it. Maybe you're going to do a fresh egg on top or something like that. So encore night can be a lot of fun. And I always recommend, if we typically eat out once on the weekend or once during the week, great, like plan that in right now. I did have somebody recently who was like, well, I do want to plan on eating out. It's just easier. However, they're like, our budget is like taking a hit because a lot of food prices are going up. So that means eating out's going up. So we kind of came up with the idea of like, okay, like you guys are going to order a pizza on this night. That's like a family staple. You always order 2 pizzas. Now I think they ordered 3, and now they order 2, and they grab a bag salad at the store that they can just like mix it all together with all the ingredients is right there. And they're pairing that together. And it's not like you have to do that, but they're finding a way to get that nourishment in, again, in a livable, doable, fun way for them. So it's like, it's just finding little things like that make it work for you.
Yeah. And the variety and that they're getting in because of doing that too. Variety in textures, variety in flavors, and then hopefully variety in the satisfaction as well.
Absolutely.
So if we could get kind of specific here in terms of like what tips you might have for busy women in midlife, either around the meal planning, the shopping, the prepping, and particularly if they're juggling multiple food preferences in their families. This comes up a lot because a lot of women in midlife are dealing with teenagers.
I know, here I am with like my 3-year-old and 10-week-old. So, but he thinks he's got preferences, but I'm like, oh, well, I serve, you decide what to eat. So I guess sometimes I do like to remind parents of that, but I understand it's not that easy. But my number one recommendation that everybody does, no matter where they are at, what their goals are, how many different preferences they're working with, take an inventory of what you have. I do recommend people do this every season if they can, or at least twice a year, to refresh it and make sure it's up to date. But take everything out of the freezer, everything out of the cabinets. If you can see it all, that's fine. You don't have to take it out, but write it all down. I can give people a printout for this, or I say like do it on a Google form or a note section on your phone. Even better if you can do it on a form that you can share with your family. So if you've got a lot of teenagers, your spouse, your loved ones with you too, you can probably all access a Google Doc. That's a great way to go. Write down every single thing that is in that pantry and freezer. And then I encourage people as a family or as an assignment for each family member, looking at what they have on hand. What would you make with this? Oh, we have 2 cans of corn. What would you make with corn? You look up a recipe for that. Like, what do you want with the I don't know, the tilapia that's in the freezer? Oh, you don't want tilapia? That's too bad. We're having tilapia. No, I'm just kidding.
You can
But
eat at your friend's house
you
tonight.
can eat at your friend's house, yeah. And like the more you learn how to cook, and teaching, I always think teaching kids to learn to cook is a great skill, no matter what age they are at. Sullen teenager, eager 3-year-old, either way. I think it's really helpful because maybe then you're not in charge of having to change up the preference if it's baked tilapia and all these veggies and wraps and stuff, but they're like, Mom, I just tilapia, I'm not doing it. Be like, great, go find another protein and then take it off of the inventory list. So maybe they want to try black beans that night, maybe they want to try canned chicken or whatever it is. If you can have an inventory that's working for you, you can plan from that inventory, and that's going to reduce your grocery bill. Like, I promise it will. It always does. If you make the inventory, plan 1 or 2 meals from the inventory, get your family involved in that planning as much as you can, and then shop from the inventory. That's the other thing. You have to make your grocery list and plan, and then you need to go shopping in your own home. Be like, you think you can rely on memory. You're like, oh no, I definitely don't have any cans of that. And then you get home with like the 3 cans of beans and you put them where the other like 6 cans of beans are. Like, dang it. So it's so normal. It's just not helpful. So always, always, always shop from what you have too. And I just think those are some of the best tips to get a handle on first, and then kind of evolve from there with like cooking and dealing with all the preferences and things like that.
Yeah, I love that inventory idea. My folks owned a restaurant when I was growing up, a small fast food restaurant, and they always had, maybe you've heard this term too, but PARs, like we always have this many cans of this many onions in the fridge, this and that. And so when those PARs get down to a point where, well, now we need to go order it, we're not out of it, but now it's time to go replenish that stock again. And so that can be a helpful way too. And whether that's someone's doing that on, pen and paper, or like you say, using a spreadsheet or using a Google Doc, we're on our devices all the time these days. And so there could be some way that they just utilize that to then you have your list already made right there in your Google.
And it's also really helpful, especially I'm thinking of like the teenagers, if they're not participating. Ask everybody to kind of sit on their phone, because they might be all ready anyway, and find a couple recipes, copy the link and put it in. And bonus if you can get the teenager or whoever to write a grocery list from that recipe or print it off, but at least you have the link. And then, hey, if you want to take it a step further and your meal planning, do it in that same document, and again, get the family involved in helping to pick meals. And then you'll have this list of meal plans that you've done week after week after week. And if you don't know what to cook one week and you're like, I don't have time to figure it out, just look back on like the list of meal plans you've already done over the last couple weeks. That's a really big time saver in the future too.
Yeah, that's a really great idea. And there's so many apps out there now too that can help you generate grocery lists and recipes and all of that, but that's not accessible for everybody to pay for an app type service or a meal plan developing service. And what you're talking about there too is teaching some skills, like teaching some basic skills. It's teaching those kids, the teenagers, some basic skills. But even if someone is just learning how to come into cooking and having this nourishing relationship with food, even in their 40s and 50s, it's teaching them some skills to like, how do I provide food for myself regularly too? And if we just went to an app all the time to do it for us, yeah, it saves time, But the number of times that I've also heard from clients, I'm like, well, yeah, but they didn't have these suggestions that I liked, or I got tired of these other suggestions that were in the app. And so, okay, so at some point in time, if you can learn to do it for yourself, then you've got more of that flexibility to play with and more
Exactly.
freedom to play with.
Yeah, and the more flexibility and freedom, the more you can take any recipe, which I do have a tip that I would love to share in just a moment, but you can take any recipe that you find, whether it's from a cookbook or online or a dear friend or something like that. You can either make it the way you see it, or the more you learn, the more you can adapt a recipe to work for you. So I hear that a lot. People are like, oh, I did try this meal planning app, or I tried this and it sent me a recipe, but I don't like that, so I can't make that. I'm like, well, wait a second. That is an opportunity to make a swap, not because you're trying to put honey in cookies or whatever it is that we were talking about earlier, but maybe it calls for sweet potatoes and you are like, I don't like sweet potatoes, and I don't know who doesn't like sweet potatoes, but hey, they're probably out there. But if you think that you can't make a recipe because you don't know how to swap in something else, that's something another skill that comes with like the meal planning and the cooking and everything. You'll be so much more confident in making a quick swap for, oh, this called for pinto beans and I've only got black beans. Can I make this recipe? Yes, yes, you can. So I think that's just another skill. And the side note tip that kind of popped into my head as another diet culture one is to watch out for when you're Googling recipes, how you are Googling those recipes. So I tell people actually to avoid the word healthy when they're searching for a recipe. I know some people have mixed thoughts on that, but I find most of the time when you say, I'm going to Google healthy turkey tacos or something like that, you get some really interesting recipes and some really interesting websites that I am like, how about we just call it turkey tacos? How about we just call it, shrimp fajitas, whatever it is. So there's definitely some things to kind of watch out for when you are searching for recipes, or there's ways to kind of tailor your search in Google so that you avoid some of the maybe triggering or just annoying websites and recipes.
Now that's a really, really great tip. I know that anytime I've gone to look for recipes online, like I'll tend towards like allrecipes.com because there seems to be less garbage on those. Or one of my culinary students taught me about the minimalistbaker.com. And they're a little like most blogs. There's a lot of ads, but you can choose like the printable version of the recipe, and then that gets rid of the ads and you can just see the stuff. They do, as most sites do, will print like the nutrition facts of things, but you can like, again, click that off if you don't want to see that. But yeah, you're right. You open up a huge can of worms by using that word healthy, because you might get the keto version of the turkey tacos.
Yeah.
Or the vegan version of the turkey tacos.
And then so start to question, should I be a vegan? Should I do keto? And like, I'm not against people who are vegan. I know that it's a little bit different, but I think just having a term in front of food can make it very confusing for people. Like, well, this is keto friendly, so wait, like, maybe should I do keto, or can I make this food? Like, it can just really muddy the waters.
Yeah, it opens up that whole can of worms of how we defined healthy, and we all defined healthy differently. Absolutely. And so who wrote that recipe and posted it, it's based on their definition of health, and might be really far away from the cultural tradition of the food itself or what the recipe initially was. But it's healthy to them. But if that's not what you're looking for, again, from that satisfaction or have a taste for this food, then you could end up being really disappointed, and or like you said, triggered of like, well, they're saying that this version of these tacos is healthy. Should I not be making it that way? And
and then we are too late and we're not going to cook tonight. And then we just feel like, okay, well, this is impossible.
Totally failed.
And like we said earlier, you can't fail at it. Just, I think the key is working with somebody and getting the right support and the right tools.
Absolutely. Yeah, Jesse, where would you like to send folks so that they can, I noticed you had a newsletter and they can be introduced to your online cooking shows, because that could be really helpful for folks.
Yeah. Find me definitely on Instagram. That's where I'm most active on social media. It's at The Kitchen Invitation. It's also on Facebook. All of my reels and things like that do not go up on my Facebook page. So I do a lot of just basic tutorials on Instagram. And then my website, thekitcheninvitation.com, you'll find my kitchen community. That's an online space for people to learn to cook through, again, the lens of intuitive eating and non-diet culture in there. It's great. We don't have any kind of that in there. And then just, of course, recipes and things like that you can find some resources as well, or just reach out to me.
Yeah, that's great. We'll put links to that in the show notes so that people can find you. And like I said, I think we need more culinary dietitians that are doing this work from this intuitive eating non-diet lens. Because just like we said about searching for a recipe online, like you can get into a dumpster fire real quick, just
fast.
because you wanted to have tacos.
Yep. If I can help someone learn how to actually cook even without a recipe, I mean, that's a even better skill. So stay tuned on things coming out for that for me. But
Yes.
yeah, it's a really easy way to get trapped if you're searching in the not best way on Google. Google can be your friend and it can be not your friend too.
Absolutely. Well, definitely, yeah. Staying on your radar for that cooking without recipes. That is a tremendous skill. And you want to talk about saving time and saving a budget.
Yes.
Cooking without recipes nails it. So yeah, for those of you that are listening, definitely check out Jesse's work and stay informed when she starts offering that. So Jesse, thanks so much for being here tonight. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. I had a blast.